council in 2003. It was only 3 years after being elected to council that I became president of the city council, and I served 2 terms. It was during that time that the first recession hit, and working side by side with the Hickenlooper administration, we cut $350 million out of the budget. We addressed the foreclosure crisis that hit our city. We addressed the collective bargaining issues with the police, fire, and sheriffs. The next mayor must be prepared to hit the ground running on day one. And you will find in tonight's debate and throughout this campaign, I'm the only candidate prepared to govern on day one. My name is Michael Hancock. I ask for your support, and I look forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Many people ask about your first 100 days in office should you win. What we'd like to know is, what do you think Michael's last month in office would look like if he won?
I want to honor Michael's story, and I want to honor the story of life that he had, because it is inspiring. But I think what's really important here is at some point we were both 21. And I think what you have to decide is, because you're interviewing for a CEO here, what did I do with the last 30 years of my life after I turned 21? And what did he do? And who do you want to hire to run your city? That's a real important question. Because I think it will determine the question of the outcome. And one of the reasons that the Denver Post endorsed me in round 1 was the belief that I would have the ability, the fresh ideas, the tenacity, and the ability to say no, particularly to pay raises, and the ability to make sure and reset that $100 million budget deficit. Because it will become like a cancer in the next administration. It will continue to be like, it's like that company where every year that company's going through more layoffs, more layoffs, and more layoffs. Morale will go down. We won't have the vision we need because we won't be able to finally get that thing out of our system. The $100 million budget deficit can split in half. About $50 million we actually will grow out of over that 4-year time period. The other 50 we will not, which means we're really going to have some tough decisions. And that's what I specialize in. I know how to ruffle feathers. I know how to make some tough decisions. So I think that last 100 days will be the process of the next mayor having to basically go through and still deal with the structural budget deficits that are created by a culture of fiscal irresponsibility, a culture of failure to lead. Leadership is about leading by example. How do you lead by example when you voted for a pay raise? How do you ask the city to do shared sacrifice when you didn't lead by example and say no? That's the challenge. And that challenge will reverberate, and it'll still be painful for the city 4 years from now.
What's my question?
Your question is the same, Michael. What do you think the last month of Chris's administration would look like if he wins?
What do I think his administration, last 100 days of his administration will?
Fair enough. The question is submitted by the GOP was the last month, but same difference. What do you think the end of his administration would look like?
Well, I truly don't expect Chris to have an administration as let me just say this, because I fundamentally believe, after touring the city in house chats and business roundtables, touching every corner of the city, the people of Denver don't expect you to size up your opponent, but they expect you to talk about the issues that matter most to the people of Denver. People talk about jobs. People think that everything he's doing, this negative campaigning, is going to backfire. And the people of Denver, but they expect that, your commercial about me is not going to put Frank, who was in Highlands, who's been on board for 3 years to work, is not going to put Cecilia Garcia's child, who catches 3 buses and a light rail from Green Valley Ranch to South High School in a quality school, and they're in his own neighborhood. Your commercial about me is not going to address the challenges that we have with the police department in this city. People of Denver, and I'm sure the Republican Party is included, we are looking for leadership in this city of ours. We are looking for someone who can hit the ground running on day one, begin to address the budgetary challenges that face the city. If you believe that the 1% across the board raise that we gave city employees, by the way, at the same time you were across the street approving stipends for state legislators, is going to add up to the $100 million deficit. Chris, once again, you've proven you don't know what city government is all about. The reality is this: it was the Wall Street bankers that created that $100 million deficit. And the same deficit that we continue, that I work with the Hickenlooper administration to bring this city out of. $350 million over 3 years. It was the foreclosures. It was people losing their jobs. Let's be truthful with the people of Denver. They are not stupid. They know what the realities are in this economy, and they're going to elect a mayor who's going to be truthful with them, is going to address the issues on day one, and bring leadership to the city.
Rules tonight, there's a 1-minute rebuttal for whoever fielded the question first. So in this sequence, Chris, you get a 1-minute rebuttal.
Sure. I sat in the firehouse not too long ago, and the first question they said, hey, you may need to ask us for some concessions, aren't you? I said, yeah, we may need to do that, because it's tough. It's real tough out there. The second thing he said, how the heck are you going to ask me for concessions from the city? Just voted a pay, city council just voted a pay raise for themselves and the mayor. Michael, how are you going to do that? How do you explain to those firefighters to take a concession when the first thing out of their mouth, unprompted, not a TV ad, was, hey, where's the leadership by example? So I understand it's awkward to talk about the tough things we have to do. I understand that. And I understand that there's issues that we have to talk about in the city. But it's very clearly this fiscal irresponsibility, including the pay raise, that now Governor Hickenlooper vetoed. And I still ask the question, what part of the word no did the city council understand when Governor Hickenlooper, then Mayor Hickenlooper, vetoed that and the city council overrode it? You know what? It's tough to say no in government, but that's what you have to do. That's how you make the numbers in government add up.
Thank you to the Denver GOP for having us here. Here is their most frequently submitted question. It has to do with the city of Denver and its reputation as a sanctuary city. Do you see that as a truthful statement? Do you feel as if illegal immigration hurts the city of Denver in any way? And in what kind of ways? And what would you do about it? And the GOP has asked me to limit your reference to the federal government. What can the city of Denver do about it, if anything? Mike?
Well, I do have to start by saying this is where the federal government has clearly let the local governments and state governments down. We do need to have a sensible legislation to come out of the federal government that creates a pathway to citizenship and allows for the proper regulation of the undocumented individuals in our city. The city of Denver has begun to take steps. First of all, we're working early enough to begin to ramp up with security communities. Security communities policy is coming out of the federal government. I fundamentally believe we do not, and the last thing that any of us should want is for us to default to racial profiling or ethnic profiling under security communities. So our officers need to be trained. I want to make sure they're the very best in implementing the policy. Secondly, we have the E-Verify program. We just adopted it through City Council to make sure as we have spent public funds that the people who are working on those public projects are actually documented workers in this country. I think that's second and important as well. Thirdly, we need to continue to have a very strong conversation in our community about how we can create a more humane approach from the city level. The one thing we don't want is to have our Denver police officers who take the oath to serve and protect us actually implementing federal laws and doing the civil law. The reality is that we want them to take care of the criminals, and where felonies are committed, and we're putting those people in jail so we can remain safe. That we do not locally have the resources to play the role of ICE on our streets. And we shouldn't ask our officers to do that. So as mayor, what I expect to do and plan to do is to continue to push, pull, and cajole our federal delegation to work very hard in Washington to send us the legislation we need so that we can have a sensible plan for dealing with undocumented people in our communities.
Thank you. It is a federal problem, and we need to continue to do this. And I had this exact question from the First Tuesday Club, I think is the name of it, and let me reject that. We are not a sanctuary city. That said, we have to work with the federal government to figure out a solution to this. It's broken for everyone. It's broken for labor, it's broken for those who employ, it's broken for those that are currently undocumented and are here, it's broken for everyone. Which is why the first thing you have to do is to really push the federal government, and I'm pleased that President Obama is starting to do this. I would ask you, if you haven't done it, go look at the laws in Utah. Go look at what the Mormon Church just released on immigration. Because one of their real values in going forward on this was not to break up families. And last time, that's a really important thing for Republicans too, is don't break up families. So, and then you think this through, there's some tough things. And I've had some very awkward moments, and I'll guarantee you, Josh Henry, Nancy Spence, and Greg Brophy don't agree with me on this one. But yeah, I did carry the bill for the undocumented kids to go to college. Because I truly believe we ultimately need to make sure that those children in this community who are here need to have hope. Because hopeless children do hopeless things. They join gangs, they get pregnant, and they basically then become a real cost to us. So, yep, it's kind of awkward. I want to be straight with you, because that's who I am. Because you may not always agree with me. You're always going to know where I stand. I don't just give pretty answers. Let me be very straight. We're going to work hard to fix this issue, but I, as mayor, am going to continue to make sure that undocumented children have a right to go in concurrent enrollment and have the right to get the ability to go to college, because that's who I am. At the same time, I'm going to also make sure that any felons who are touching our system ultimately return over to ICE. Thank you.
This is one of those areas where I think we clearly agree. And I will tell you that it's a very, I think, a commonsensical thought. Either we pay today to make sure that those children have an access to quality education, or we'll pay for them later as we work them through a system where it's the justice system. And I simply believe it is much more palatable and it's much more affordable for as a city, or excuse me, as a state, that we make sure that these young people who have gone through the public school system, have done everything right, have access and the opportunity to attend college as well. So that's why I've supported our resolutions and proclamations at City Council each time to come through to encourage the state legislature to pass the DREAM Act and to pass access to quality higher education for immigrant children.
You both speak eloquently about the kids, and nobody doubts the sincerity of your commitment. Everybody was impressed with the kids who appeared in front of us today, but looking up the numbers before I came over, less than 50% of the kids in this school will graduate. Less than 50% will complete after any period of time. So who and what do you blame for that, and how are you going to fix it?
You know, we're a world-class city going on to the next level. We can't sustain the next level unless we stop and figure out how to change a 53% graduation rate. Because a world-class city doesn't have a 53% graduation rate. And it's combined with an awful lot of things. It's combined with lack of having enough time on task. There's one of the other charter schools I've worked with called KIT, which is 90% low income, 90% Latino, 90% of them go to college. It's a pretty simple formula. It's called work hard, be nice, no excuses. And unfortunately, we don't have that model in many schools. And I wish they did in a place like West, in the elementary schools and the middle schools that feed into this school. And the issue is that what it really takes is 50% more time on task to get low-income children. I talked a lot about in the legislature. It takes 50% more time on task to get low-income children up to that level of capacity and ready to go to school, ultimately then go on to college. And what it means is we have to have an acknowledgement in the system that you have to have a longer school day and longer school year. And for too often, the rules have been written for the adults in school, but not for the children. Because those things that are done at KIPP, and yes, it's a charter school, could be done in any neighborhood school or any middle school in Denver. But we don't have the time yet to do that. Which is why, as mayor, I'll work in the school system to set really high expectations and figure out what we can do. Let me also tell you, though, we can figure out how to do it as a team. And one of the things I like to do is to be mayor to help make sure that particularly low-income children have very good exposure to math and science. Because we know, for instance, that when a low-income child gets a 4 or 5 on a physics test, or 4 or 5 on a calculus test, it's a game changer. It's a game changer for them and those behind them. Which is why I've worked so hard to bring a program called NIMSI, the National Math and Science Institute, to Denver, first at Lincoln High School. And I'll expand that citywide. So I'm going to set high expectations, but I'm going to hold DPS accountable for a longer school day and a longer school year. We're going to make these rules work for the students, not just for the adults.
To your question, you asked who do we blame and how do we change the trajectory of this epidemic. To be honest with you, there is not one particular body or organization or group to blame. I believe that one of the first steps, and by the way, this is a multi-layered cultural challenge all throughout the state, throughout this nation. But one of the first steps that we need to take is what we did in the far northeast, is we created the turnaround strategies. And I know right now there's an effort to do similar work right here at West High School underway. And some of the community members and parents have actually called my office and other folks who have been involved in that turnaround strategy asking, what did you do to get going? It was a community-driven, from a community-up process. And it engaged Denver Public Schools in a very earnest process because the community was driving. And I'm going to tell you something. Where I have found schools that are achieving, schools that have a high graduation rate, parents in the community are greatly engaged in those schools. And we've got to do the same thing around the West High Schools, around the Montbello High Schools. There has to be a clearing call for community and parental engagement, whether you have kids in that school or not. Because I'll tell you, one of the first steps to economic strengthening of our community and our society is to turn around failing schools. If we want to have strong communities, we better start with improving the schools where we desire such strong school communities. And so I think that's the first step, community and parental engagement, and then we begin to get to all the other layers that exist in order to have quality schools for our children.
So I started on this journey long ago when I graduated from Pease, and on the 10-year anniversary of my graduation from a building just like this, I had the determination and the ability, the skill to start a foundation, which 22 years later is one of the better known dropout prevention programs in Denver I ever dreamed. I was 28 years old. I went on and spent 22 years trying to figure this out. One thing I do know, and I know it very well from my gut things, is that when you have an adult who bonds in any way, shape, or form in an unconditional relationship with a student, and then you give that student high expectations, magic will happen. So too much of what we do is to disconnect that really human issue of making sure that there is an adult in the classroom who bonds with a student, who then sets high expectations, and then resources to deliver. This is the old Jaime Escalante stand and deliver story. And you can do it, but you have to make sure you facilitate that real, authentic relationship. It's something I had learned and I had a dream 22 years ago. It's a magic formula. It's something we can do. The community's responsibility is to help create more ways to do that. So what can a mayor do? A mayor can really help with the wraparound services. We have 50 different after-school programs, many of whom, and none of you I'm aware of, that are really able to authentically share data back to the schools. So Big Brothers, Big Sisters, I Have a Dream, and OWL, and all these great after-school programs can't really talk back to the data as ties within the silo of BPS. So what a mayor can do is crack open those silos, share the data, and figure out how to deal with the child holistically. Secondly, what a mayor can do is make sure that children arrive at school ready to learn. And those are important things. We've always said, are you running for city council? It's either you're running for school board or for mayor. And it's very clear that a mayor who believes that one of their responsibilities is to make sure that we have the human capital to compete in the 21st century has to care urgently about this issue.
City Councilman Hancock, we're at a GOP forum. People are concerned about business. A lot of people who live in Denver find themselves shopping outside of Denver. I work in downtown at 80202. When I go to Target or Walmart website and put in the zip code, it directs me to Edgewater or Glendale. We have competition from all the suburbs. In a Hancock administration, are you friendly to big box retail? Would you want more of it, or is it something bad for the city? And why are they going to Glendale and Edgewater and the surrounding communities?
You know, Craig, we live in a great city that has a lot of great things about it. But one of the things that being on city council for the past 8 years, particularly recently as I have returned to chairing the Economic Development Committee after being president for 2 terms, is that we don't have a sensible retail strategy in place. And we have to develop one. And I'm excited about becoming the next mayor in order to guide our economic officers toward creating that economic strategy. I will tell you that there's several people in the city government who annually go to the big retail conference in Las Vegas every year. And one of the frustrating things that they share with me, including Councilman Charlie Brown, is that we never go there with a strategy to have a conversation about recruiting big box or any other type of retail to Denver. Yes, we'll be friendly, but we have to sit down with our partners, the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, the Chamber of Commerce, and the other partners in the region and say, how can we create the right strategy so that when we go to Las Vegas and we go to these other national conferences where we're coming into play with the big boxes and their representatives, we can sit down and we can zero in on them and say, this is why you need to come to Denver. This is what we're looking for. We have some great opportunities for economic development in Denver. It's not the big major project area anymore. But as we look at 9th Avenue and Colorado Boulevard, as we look at Arapahoe Square, as we look at Union Station, these are prime opportunities for investment and for selling. And I'm looking forward to being the chief marketer of this city with a retail strategy in hand and zero in on the opportunities that we want to attract to Denver.
We missed the big ones. We missed IKEA. IKEA is a $250 million a year opportunity, which on 3% sales tax would have created $7.5 million per year, which would have then helped us cut that $50 million per year structural budget deficit. So it was a little bit of work of the previous administration. We could have figured out how to go after this in a way that we could have started to solve this problem. We had another opportunity with all that retail that went down to Sheridan. All of that, again, about $250 million worth of retail could have been in Gates. But we weren't urgent enough about this. We didn't have the ability to come forward and make sure that we put that together. So we're going to have to really think this through, because one of the things I've talked about a lot, that's why having some experience in the private sector is really important when you go into government. Because one of the things I've tried to do is to make sure that government learns to move at the speed of business. Because right now, City Hall is so full of red tape, and the way in which they just do politics as usual, you talk to developers, you talk about Denver, they don't want to